Daredevil, aka Matt Murdock, can do this. So, is he disabled? This is a difficult question and one that reflects a lot on our society and how we think about people with differences. Welcome to Philosophy All Along, where we think deep. So today I want to really dive into something that hits on an issue that, for many of us, goes undiscussed. Whilst we do talk about people with different needs and struggles throughout our society, one group of people that seems to kind of really go under the radar are people with physical differences, mental differences. It's almost as if we're totally ignoring them. So it's really nice when shows like Daredevil and Echo bring it right to us and in front of us. But do they represent well? And in particular, in this case, does Daredevil represent well? In other words, are we getting a great depiction of what the experience of blindness is like and what it is like for someone who is disabled to go through their lives having that kind of difference and that kind of experience? So let's kind of look at it in terms of the problem of whether or not Matt actually is someone who has the struggles of blindness. Now, I've seen other people discuss it, and they seem to think no. For example, he wears the glasses that are often common amongst people who are blind, and he carries a cane. But both of those are part of a disguise, right? Now, on the other hand, Matt does not have eyes that provide him with the ability to see. His seeing experience is one that he describes as a world on fire. It is one that is created through other abilities that he has, but he is not having the experience of seeing the way that most people who talk about seeing talk about it, right? He's not having these color experiences. He's not having these shades and textures. We can't imagine what it's like. We can only kind of depict it or make it up in the TV show in a way that still is using our eyes to depict it, but it just wouldn't be what it's like for him. So what it's like for him, we don't know. We'll do a whole other different video on that. What I really want to focus on is the question of, does he know what it is like currently in his state? Because growing up, right, he couldn't see. He had to acquire his abilities that enabled him to navigate the world. But can he now be said to be a disabled person? So that hits on something that's very tough, which is the problem of, I'm not even a big fan of the word disability. I like differability. The reason behind this is because the idea of disability suggests that there's something that someone doesn't have, a dis, right, that they should have. In other words, an ability that you don't have that you should have. And that is very concerning, as opposed to a different set of abilities, which would be true of all of us, right? You have some abilities that I don't have, and that's okay. We just kind of have to navigate that difference. When you have a disability, it basically suggests that your society has decided, here's the set of abilities that everyone should have, and if you don't have that set of abilities, well, there's something wrong with you, something that we need to fix, something that we'll make fun of, something that we'll pity, whatever it happens to be. So disability relies, I think, more on society than it relies on actual physical limitations and lacking of abilities. Because if you think about it, there's all kinds of abilities that we don't have, that we don't sit there and think, oh, I'm disabled. It's when our society says, oh, but you should have that ability, that all of a sudden that disability comes to mind. So thinking about, again, like superheroes, imagine a world in which everyone can fly, right? Imagine you're a parent in that world, and you want to send your child to school, and everyone can kind of like Superman fly, right? So now imagine you're the one parent on the planet who, for whatever reason, your child can't fly. Well, imagine what that school was built like, how it was built, and the expectations in that school. Well, in that school, where everyone can already fly, they're not going to have things like stairwells. They're not going to have elevators. Playing sports in that school is going to be very different. All kinds of stuff in terms of the physical structure of the school are going to be different. So you send your kid to school, right? Your kid can't get to class on time because they have to have someone else fly them up, right? They have to sit on the ground because who needs chairs in a world where everyone can just kind of hover around? So they're there in the, in the dust and the dirt on the floor, right? The sports events are radically different for them, and they're probably left out. You'd be pretty upset as a parent, and you'd probably call the school and you'd be like, hey, you need to at least put like a rope my child can climb or something. And they might say, why are we going to spend the money on that, just for your special needs? And the whole point here being is, if you think about it, none of us have that ability to fly, and yet none of us feel disabled. But in that school, in that world, in which the world is kind of built around the assumption that you can fly, all of a sudden, you, if you were that child, would feel very disabled. So for many people in the community of disability and differability, their argument is no, I don't lack something that I should have. You just built a society around excluding me. Maybe you didn't intend to do that, in the same way that the people who designed that school in our thought experiment weren't like, hey, I'm going to make sure that any child who can't fly is going to really suffer. But it nevertheless excludes, right? And weirdly, it also could result in people making assumptions about you, if you're the child, in terms of your intellect that have nothing to do with your actual abilities when it comes to like mathematics, for instance. Like if you're always late to your math class because you can't get there in time, you start performing more poorly in math. And people go, well, I guess people who can't fly are also dumb. And that brings up an important point. Think about how often in our discussions of disability, we use a language that suggests that there's something wrong with this. Like the word dumb actually comes from initially meaning someone who can't speak. Or you might say to someone, I don't understand how you don't understand. Are you blind? Right? Stuff like that. Oh, are you not getting my point? Are you deaf? Right? We use language like that with regularity. Even if I'm in this conversation saying something like, well, we can see here, I've already used a language that has excluded everybody who does not have that particular ability. So what's the point? Looking at something like Daredevil, is he having that kind of struggle that, say, someone who is disabled by our society having? And I think the answer is yes. So yes, Daredevil is able to do all of these things, right, that you would think, well, someone who's blind cannot do. And so is it a really unfair depiction of blindness, a kind of romanticized one that makes us think that we're somehow sympathetic and not, but actually while not being sympathetic, but when we look at it from the perspective of differabilities, yes, he has a very different set of abilities than people, as our society is constructed, are supposed to have. He's able to function similarly to people who can see, but he doesn't have the same experience. It's arguably, if, like he said, it's a world on fire, he's having a very, very different kind of experience there. And so although he can fight and he can navigate the street and so on and so forth, his engagement with the world is one that we kind of can't imagine, and it leaves him to some degree ostracized. And what I mean by that is something that is, I think, one of the most important struggles for the community of people with different abilities and therefore being ostracized for it. Matt has to hide his abilities, partly because of his whole superhero thing, but partly because he lives in a world that doesn't understand who he is, his experience. He's the only person who has it. So he is very, very closeted, right? In other words, he is someone who has to kind of hide where he is in terms of his own personal struggles, hide who he is, and he can't really kind of go out for help. The world infrastructure isn't built to help him. And I think that that is something that many people who are in the disability community can probably relate to, which is simply the problem of we tend to treat disability as something that should be hidden. And as a result of that idea of like, well, I don't want to see it, right? Like, we don't want to see you. We're going to kind of put you, around the back, right? You go into your own community, so on and so forth. The result of that, there's many communities that technically are not dealing with some sort of physical differability, but because of their treatment in society of being kind of closeted, whether it's the gay community, women, people of color, that they have a similar struggle, which fundamentally is there's something you should have that you don't have. And our society is going to either, hate you, ostracize you, hide you, or try to fix you, right? So for instance, the gay community can certainly attest to that, right? This idea like, well, we're going to get in there and that we'll fix that for you. In the same way people who are blind experience, well, we're going to get that, we're going to fix that for you, right? People who don't hear might be told things like, well, oh, I'm going to go in there, we're going to fix that for you. So that idea of needing to be fixed. So I do think, make a long story short, that Matt is a good example of someone with that differability set. Is he a great example of the specific struggles of someone who is blind? No. But as someone who is, by our society, determined to be disabled, yes, he does have that struggle. And it would be wise for us to try to understand it as best as we can. Thanks so much for your conversation today with me. Please put comments, let me know what I missed, like, subscribe, help the channel out, share it with a couple of other people if you think it was a valuable video. I appreciate your time today. Take care.